Okay, in this video module, what we're going to do is dive into the world of GUIs. Now, this is really just an introduction to GUIs, what they are, and how we can simply get them into the level and have them set up as basic triggers. That's all. Now that everybody's seen how to set up a trigger, we felt that that would be the appropriate direction. Now, GUIs, or graphical user interfaces, can be set up to do some very complex things, way past the world of basic triggering. And that's something that we're going to dive into in later videos. There's just a lot more that needs to be understood first before we can get there. So again, this is just an introduction. How do we get it set up in the level? Now, like I said, a GUI means it's a graphical user interface, something that plays a very big role in the Doom 3 game. You see them all over the place, on kiosks, you see them on wall displays, you see them on computer screens, lockers, etc. Basically, they're just this user interface that you can walk up to, and you get your mouse as you interact over the user interface. You're able to press buttons on it. You can control what screens are displayed. And by interacting with this GUI, you can cause various things to happen in the level. And it's no different, really, than the GUI that you're looking at right now on your Windows application, the video player that you're using to play the video that you're watching. You may have a menu bar, you may have a toolbar, or any other application. Or, for example, Doom Edit itself, it's got a GUI that you interact with, and as you press buttons, various things happen. So it's really the same thing in the Doom world. It's just understanding how to set GUIs up, and that's not what we're going to look at. We're not going to look at how to develop GUIs. Now, there is a GUI editor that's built in that you can use to develop your own GUIs, and again, that's something that we're going to be covering later. The idea right now is what I'm going to do is just set up just a couple very simple GUIs that are going to act nothing more than as triggers. Okay?
Okay. So the first thing we'll take a look at is how you would go about creating a simple brush and making one of its surfaces a usable GUI.
Okay.
To do that, let me go and start drawing out. I'll probably draw, like, I don't know, just a simple cube. Move it up so it's about eye height. Just something like that. And the idea here is one of the faces on this cube will be a GUI, and when you click on that GUI, the little rotating platform and light turn on.
What texture's on that by default? It's just the black one at the moment?
Right now I probably have black, so it might not be a bad idea to go over to textures and throw maybe concrete on it.
That looks good.
So let me move up on it a little bit. So
the first thing that we're going to need to do is somehow we're going to need to tell the system where the GUI needs to be placed, on which face.
Right, because if we look over on the Entity tab, we have GUI that can be assigned to this entity, just like model or anything, but that means you have the GUI, which is associated with the entire entity. We need to be able to specify exactly where on that entity we're going to draw the GUI. So the way you set up where it draws is you apply a special texture to one or more faces, and that defines where the GUI actually draws. This texture can be found under Media, and if we collapse this back up under, let me scroll down, Common, and then we have Entity GUI. I'm going to deselect the cube and use Control-Shift to select just the single face so that I can click on that, and it jumped me back to where I was before. So let me go back, navigate over to Common, and grab Entity GUI. So we have Entity GUI applied to this face now. So if we were to apply a GUI to the entity, that's where it would go. But notice that it has a black border for its edges, and that's very useful because you need to align this to the face that you're drawing. You don't want to have an entity that kind of like cuts off and repeats and looks like an old VCR or something. So what we need to do now is, let me move this out of the way a little bit and get back to the viewport. I'm going to deselect just that face and then select the, actually let me grab that face back and hit S. So I grab the surface editor for just a second so I can hit the fit button. And there we have the Entity GUI texture aligned where it tiles only once across the entire face.
And obviously aligning our texture is pretty important.
Right. So that now we basically have defined, if we apply a GUI to this entity, where does it draw? Well, on this face, the entire face, and just that face, basically. So, alright, we've got this set up. Now we want to actually apply the GUI to it, but there's a few things we have to do first. Up to this point, this is just your standard brush. We've just drawn it out, dragged it out. We don't really have enough functionality within a standard brush entity to allow for a GUI, or to even allow for triggering later when we need to finalize the setup. So what we'll need to do at this point, before applying the GUI, is select the brush entity, right-click on it, and change it into a func static, or basically create a func static using that brush. So now that it's a func static, we have access to the necessary properties. First of which is GUI. We can actually go and apply a GUI to that to the entire entity. And that's one important thing to remember, is that we're actually applying a GUI to the entire entity. That's why we had to have that
texture to define where
to draw it. So let me scroll down through GUIs and maybe grab control panels. And inside of control panels, I'll select light switch 3. So a very simple GUI that can be turned on and off. So I'll hit OK, and let me scroll in my properties here. GUI has been set to light switch 3. So we should have a GUI applied to it that we can use. Now, the way this GUI works is it basically allows us to use this func static as though it were a trigger, which means that in order to actually trigger anything in the level, we take the func static and we target it at something. So we want to turn on the func rotating and the light. So with it selected, I'll hold shift, select the func rotating light, and hit Control K. So now we've targeted the func static entity at both of these. And with that, that should pretty much make up the setup we need for this simple GUI to work. I'll do and run a quick BSP to make sure that this cube exists in the level, and save the map out. So I can go in and say map GUI 1. And we'll see if it's working. So now if you look at the cube, yep, we definitely have the GUI applied to that face. So if we walk up to it, we get the little cursor on the GUI. We can click the power button and check it out. We've triggered our light and func rotating.
Very nice.
And I can click it again, turn it back off, because that's some of the functionality built into that specific GUI.
Very cool.
So now that we've seen how to bring a GUI into your map from scratch, we basically just apply it to a surface. Let's take a look at how you would bring in a fully detailed model that has been set up for a GUI, and then go through and run through a similar setup where we apply the GUI of your choice to an existing model. To do that, I'm going to move the camera over to the other room, which has a swinging light setup in it. Now this is just a very basic setup. The light itself is an E and V swinging light. So basically a light with dynamics applied to it. Then I took some func static models for the actual light bulbs, and finally put a light entity and bound the light entity in the two bulbs to the actual light fixture so that everything swings when shot. So a fairly simple setup. What we're going to do is make a little control panel that should be a light switch, but it's kind of going to be a malfunctioning light switch.
It will teleport monsters in from somewhere else.
I used to just hate it when that happens. But anyway, the first thing that we're going to need is the model for our control panel. So let me hit escape so I can deselect what I've got selected now, move my top view over to that other room, right click and say new model. So basically I can add a func static with a certain model applied. So we'll give it just a second, pull up the model list, and the model I'm looking for should be located under Map Objects, Com, Plat GUI Stand, and grab the Plat GUI Stand model. Hit OK, and there we go. Now notice that in sometimes past we were actually able to pull a model directly in and it drawed correctly, but this time it's drawing as though it was a brush. This is a common bug that happens frequently. If this does happen to you, simply clone the entity with the spacebar, and your clone should draw as the correct model. And then just delete the original that wasn't drawing correctly.
Also, saving your map and reopening it will make
right, it actually
properly.
does have the correct model. We just need to get the editor up to date on that fact. So, of course, as Buzz just said, saving and loading will also work.
This is just a lot faster, just simply cloning and deleting.
Right. So what I'm going to do now is align this to the floor, and I'm going to have to draw out my grid to about 2 to do that. So let me align something like that. Set it back to default. Now I want to kind of angle this entity towards the door a little bit, just to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'll set the angle by just using the 315 degrees button, conveniently located on the Entity tab. So now we have the entity positioned and rotated the way we want. Now we can go ahead and jump straight to setting up the GUI, because since we're bringing in a model, it already is a func static, so we don't have to worry about anything there. We can just immediately go click on GUI and grab the same one, hit OK. So we've applied the light switch GUI to this object.
Now, how did it know where to put the GUI?
If I deselect it and zoom in a little bit, we can see that this model's textures include the entity GUI texture.
So it's already been properly textured.
That texture has been applied to part of it, and that's where the GUI will appear.
Exactly.
So now that we have something that will pretty much work as a trigger, as we've seen before, that if we apply the light switch GUI to this area, then the entire thing can be used as a trigger. Now we need something to trigger, and this is where we get into a bit of a special setup with a monster. So the first thing I'll do is just start out with a very simple monster. We'll add the good old zombie jumpsuit. So now we have a zombie. Let me throw him on the floor. And, well, he'd work as a monster, but the idea here is to make a monster spawner, not just a single monster.
Spawn and attack.
Right, so we spawn in, and for the attack part, I'm simply going to rotate him towards the GUI so that as the player spawns monsters, they immediately see and attack. Now, this is where we get into some of the special setup for that monster. If we look through some of its properties that can be set, we'll notice right away that there's a teleport property, which makes it so that instead of immediately being in the level and roaming around or waiting to see the player, it doesn't exist at all until triggered. And then when triggered, it appears with the full effect of the orange glow, the lightning, the sound, even a little bit of a physics effect. So, since this is the effect we're after, let me go ahead and set teleport to 1. So, this monster teleports in. Now, I want to tweak this just a bit farther. At the moment, this still acts as a single monster. It teleports in, it exists until you kill it, and then it's all over. What we want to do is actually set this guy up as a monster spawner. And it's a little bit buried, but if I run through here, you'll notice that we have the spawner property that can be set. And spawner takes in a certain number, basically a max amount of monsters that can exist at any given time, spawn from this one point. So if I was to set this to 2, what this means is that I can spawn up to 2 zombies from the sky. And if I continue trying, basically if I continue triggering after 2 zombies, those triggers get held in a queue, so that as I kill zombies, more spawn in until I've run out of times that I've hit the trigger.
Right, and when Logan says kill zombie, he's talking about the zombie's gone, the ragdoll's gone, all the effects associated with it are gone. Everything dealing with the zombie that just died is completely gone before one pops out of the queue.
Right. So we'll leave that set too, so that there can only be 2 zombies in existence at any given time. So we've got our zombie spawner set up. Now we need to make sure that the func static, our model, is targeted at that zombie so that we have the proper trigger set up. So select the func static, shift select the zombie, Control K, and there we go. We can see that the func static, our control panel, is targeted at the zombie, which has been set up as a spawner. Now to neaten things up, I'll simply drag the zombie right underneath the light, and we can go ahead and save and test the map. So reload the map, and we'll see if this all works. This is
simply the type of light you would not wish that you had.
Yeah, if you think it's bad when you turn on the light and the light blows out, just be happy this doesn't happen. So yep, there's definitely something wrong with that light.
There's one. Let's lure him away and bring in number 2.
So click the GUI again, and there we have the second.
So now let's try to squeeze over there and do number 3.
Nothing
activating,
happens
but nothing
yet. So might have to take things out of it.
It's going back there, so go ahead and work your way to the other side. It's a little easier.
Okay. So make sure I have the light fixture in view.
Yeah.
Come here, zombie. So, well, he's down,
still
but
nothing, because there's still stuff associated with him in there.
So, kill out the red
here it goes, almost gone. It's fading. All effects must be gone. Here it comes.
And there we go. Now we have that extra zombie, because, again, it basically holds a queue of how many times it's been triggered.
That's right.
2 can exist at any given time, but beyond that, as those 2 are killed, it keeps respawning until its queue amount has been met. Cool. So with that, I mean, we've not only taken a look at how to get GUIs into the game, then how to apply them to more advanced models that you bring in, but also taking a look at setting up an interesting scenario with a zombie spawner.
That's right. And again, this is just an introduction to GUIs. I mean, we can take this so deep, and we plan to. We're just going to do these in other videos. This was just really a welcome to the world of GUIs. Here's how you slap it on a brush, and here's how you slap it on a model that already exists, and here's how you can make it trigger something. So with that, that's going to wrap up this lesson.